Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast, where we chat to founders, creators, and self-starters about how they started and where they are now. I'm your host, Byron Greeley, and today's guest is Stephen Dooley, the founder of Roamr. Roamr is a unique employee house swap and meetup platform that enables businesses to offer global mobility as a perk. We have a wide-ranging conversation and discuss things like how Stephen noticed a gap in the market and the checklist he used to ensure that it was the right business for him to pursue. We discuss how he did his market research and what he needed to do to validate his idea. We speak about his appetite for risk and the valuable lessons he learned from analyzing the user experience. There's a lot of value packed in this episode. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure you will too. Enjoy the show. Hey, Stephen, thanks for joining me today. To get started, can you tell me about what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so thanks for having me first and foremost. But my name is Stephen Dooley. I'm the founder of Roamr. So Roamr is an employee accommodation platform where firms can save money while paying their employees at the same time. So the easiest way to do that is to give an example. So let's say you work for a tech company, you're a product manager based in Dublin. They need you out in San Fran for a month, maybe to lead a project or to meet the team in person. Typically, that will be about $10,000 that the company pays to a hotel. Whereas with Roamr, what we say is you have a colleague in San Francisco who has a spare room. If they host you, they can get paid $3,000. You, the traveling employee, gets paid $3,000 and the company saves €4,000. So yeah, that's it. It's a kind of corporate travel cost reduction tool where employees get paid.
Great. And what made you aware of this problem?
I suppose the world view that I had before Roamr was I was doing PhD research. I was looking at how Uber and Airbnb created trust and adoption. So I was probably looking at the world through that kind of a lens. But I had the pain point that I experienced personally as an employee. So I was also head of a business faculty in college. And with COVID, everything went online instantly. And when we kind of figured that out and we got out of crisis mode, coming towards the end of the Christmas semester, I kind of saw this opportunity to no longer need to do the whole sacrificing travel for career progression because remote work was now so readily available. And I said to my boss, hey, do you mind if I go to Marseille for a month between the two semesters? And I had this vision of coffee shop, croissant and corrections all in one because it was all on the laptop. And he was totally open to it. He said, yeah, I don't think there's a problem there. We've got better at defining those policies since then, and most companies have them. But it was all okay from a tech perspective, a policy perspective. But then I went on to Airbnb and the dream was instantly over when I saw the €3,500 price tag. So that was my version of the problem. I experienced the pain point personally. My co-founder Jason as well has a variation of the same issue. So he and his wife Anya, they were going to go to Italy for a month and do a work from abroad trip. They saved up a little bit longer and had the money put aside. But when push came to shove, there was just a bit too much anxiety for them around the workstation and the work needs. So, is the Wi-Fi going to be reliable there? Is there dual monitors there? If we're going for a month, we kind of want some home comforts to be productive. And even things like, can we both be on calls at the same time? No platform kind of was figuring that out. So for us, work centricity is a big part of what we do. We want people to be able to pick up the laptop and be able to work as soon as they land somewhere. So initially, we built the product as kind of an employee home swap and hosting platform. So it was positioned more for personal use. So hey, you have this 30-day work from anywhere policy. The problem is you can't use it. Why don't you use Roamr? And then kind of selling that to chief people officers, and just conversations were had that seemed that there's a huge opportunity here also in that sort of travel manager piece where people get paid for corporate trips. So it actually exists as both. So when we sell to a company, their employees can get paid if they're doing a work required trip. And by the way, you guys can also travel for free for workations or personal trips. So yeah, that was kind of the backdrop of what we were doing beforehand.
And when you say swap, I'm picturing something slightly different to the example you gave when there was an existing employee and someone moving into their room. But do you also facilitate complete swaps between people from completely different businesses?
Yeah, so there's two parts of that question. So there's the model of exchange, and then there's is it intercompany or across company? So there's two different models of exchange. There's a direct swap. So are you based in South Africa today?
No, I'm based in London.
So let's say You're based in London. So let's say London and you wanted to come to West Cork in Ireland. If both of us wanted to go to those places at the same time, we would do a swap and we can both work from a new location for a month without having to pay. So that's the two-way model. And then the hosted model is, hey, I've got a spare room. I'm comfortable with people coming through. And, I know that I'll be a part of the community that does that for return for me. So that's the personal trip. You can do two-way or one-way, hosted stays or swaps. But then the example I gave you of the paid trip, that's typically a hosted trip. So it's typically a one-way swap. And then the other part of the question you had there is, can you do it across companies? We've built for either. We suggest having it as an open platform for personal trips because it just broadens the pool. There's more locations, there's more opportunities to connect with people who have opposite wants to you. But we can kind of do either or if the company has a preference for it being internal only or not. But I think the go-to-market for us is for the paid version, for those work-required trips, very much focusing on having it as internal. So the pitch there to employers is, hey, instead of paying a random hotel, 2 of your employees can earn more money and you can save money. So that's a more compelling piece, I think.
Yeah, it definitely is. And so you noticed the problem and you were deeply studying Airbnb and Uber. Was that the bit that gave you the confidence that you were the right person to solve this problem, or was there something else on top of that?
Yeah, there was a few reasons why I kind of decided, hey, this has to be something that I go after. I definitely, there was something innate in me that I'd always kind of talked about wanting to start my own business and build something. But before that, I was also lecturing in entrepreneurship and kind of had studied the book on it. And this time, what aligned was I kind of had 3 criteria that aligned at the same time. And I didn't know how many times that happens in your life. So the first one was I experienced the pain point directly. So I had quite a high passion to solve it because it was a frustration for me. Like I wanted to travel, I couldn't. Someone has to do something about this. The second point was I felt that unique domain expertise, or the unfair advantage is kind of the startup-y term for it, that existed here because the PhD research was very much understanding how the hell did Uber and Airbnb do what they did. And the third one is like the macro trends the tailwinds were quite high for it, right? There's this wave of location flexibility. Now 97% of tech firms are offering location flexibility. So and what Airbnb have done in terms of like changing society's mindset, like back in 2002, 2004, when we were doing online transactions, our fear was, is someone going to steal my identity and is someone going to steal my money, right? And then roll it on to about 2008 where you have the Ubers, the Airbnbs. That now is a kind of blended in-person and online transaction. So the fears in people at that point was, okay, are they going to steal my money, my identity, and are they going to murder me now that they know where I live? So if Airbnb tried to hit the market in 2002, they would have had a much higher challenge. They still had a huge challenge to overcome those societal behaviors. But because they've done what they have, society is now totally open to doing that. Like even the corporate travel market. So, in 2017, 93% of trips used to be booked for hotels. By 2019, that had gone down to 68%. So people are actually open to the short-term rental piece. So all of those pieces lined up, all the societal waves and trends were on our side. Felt like I understood the pain point and had that unfair advantage. And Jason absolutely helps me out on that one too. So yeah, that's kind of why I said, right, it's got to be now, because I don't know how many times that's going to line up for me again.
Yeah, and those 3 criteria lining up, I think, are the most like basic necessity to start a business. Those 3 things kind of have to align in order to actually go for it and see that it's actually a worthwhile thing to pursue. Because I mean, if it's not balanced and one of those is missing, you're not necessarily motivated to like continue going and actually make it a reality.
Yeah, I think for me, like the passion to solve it was tied up in the understanding of the problem. I'm not sure whether that's always the case. If you're someone who had been, maybe you have that unfair advantage, but you don't have that passion to solve the problem. Let's say you worked in banking and you did KYC and you knew that there was problems in that, and maybe you're not like absolutely over the moon at solving that problem. Whereas for me, it was I just felt like the world was on my doorstep waiting to be accessed. I didn't have to sacrifice travel against career anymore. Apart from the fact that it cost thousands of dollars to do that. So there was a sort of let's figure this out and let's go. Yeah. And I spoke to friends and they had the same issues, and that gave me the sort of support to say there is a problem out here. I then went on months and months of kind of customer discovery, because we're going B2B. No one has done that really before. So we had to make sure what's the challenge for customers, and took some time to make sure that that existed, and that there was evidence, rather than just saying, hey, I want to go to Marseille, let me go build a company.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you guys are going after B2B. I'm sure everyone is aware that there are other house swapping type sites out there. So why feel the need to niche down even further and focus on this business angle?
It comes from not being able to do the trip. So like the pain point was a barrier. I didn't immediately go, I better build a home swap company. I went, let me look at other alternatives to this, right? Airbnb is too expensive. What could I do? Went in, and there's existing incumbents there. They're all B2C models. I've never met any of the founding teams, but they've existed in the same form for kind of decades at this point. So I don't think there's the same. I think a lot of the time it's a lifestyle business approach. They typically go after like a retiree type of user who's got a second home or an empty nest. Whereas for us, the problems were you had to pay for that membership up front, right? So they charge you before you necessarily know how many people want to come to Cork, how many swaps am I going to get? So there was a cost barrier immediately. The second piece was there was absolutely zero work centricity in the platform. Like we're going to work when we're over there. We need to know that we can be connected. I don't think Airbnb is even doing enough in that regard, let alone the home swaps. So a lot of them do like trusted house sitters and pet sitting and those kind of pieces, which solves a problem, but just didn't solve our problem. So yeah, even within like a differentiator from them is we're totally free. The employees never pay a penny on Roamr. We went and made sure that the problems that companies had, this was going away to solve that too. And then even versus Airbnb, I don't think they were doing enough and still aren't doing enough on the work centricity piece. I've heard loads of war stories of we got there and the Wi-Fi was crap, and the host sent me a fake internet speed test. So we've kind of built out all those solutions. But yeah, it stemmed from not being able to use one of those platforms. So then having to figure out, is there an alternative model that can kind of work in this space?
And what has been the traction so far?
Yeah, so we're early stages still, but we're really happy with the momentum. So Jason joined me full time April of last year. So he's the techie. He is the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me. He's kind of built, like, he's a decade experience across different startups, CTO in one for an interim stint, first engineer, and the companies that he's worked for are super relevant. So that was quite lucky to find Jason, but he came on board in April, and we kind of rolled out with our first companies in November. So it's still like early days for us. We've got some paying customers. We now have to kind of crack the usage and have a nice pipeline of a couple of big companies that are in the mix for kind of Q2. So quite happy, but still early in the journey. I'm sure there's a ways to go,
Cool. And how did you guys meet?
Yeah, so essentially we met on Tinder for founders. So I don't know if you've seen Y Combinator founder match. No?
I have.
It is what it says on. It was quite lucky. I to be honest, when I kind of put it out there, I didn't expect all that much from it, because you kind of see like investment stories where someone who worked together for a previous 5 years goes to start a company. That's really desirable. So for us, we had to figure out, how do we align on everything? What do we do in terms of finding conflict? How do we work through that? And we took our time over it for sure before going full time at it. But what was amazing and why we instantly connected was his response on the message was, your company is the first company that I would use. I fully understand this pain point. Let's have a conversation. So even in that story at the start, when I explained the nuance of how I felt the pain and how Jason and Anya felt the pain, they got it. He got it. So it meant that the desire to go and figure out the solution existed. And then he has a crazy good CV that's really relevant. So that's like a nice kicker too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Has he been sort of involved part-time until he became full-time? What was the early stages of founding Roamr like?
Yeah, so it was that. It was kind of like, I liken it to probably dating. You go on a couple of full dates before you get married, but it's definitely more of a shotgun wedding than the typical romantic scenario. But yeah, we took time. We did maybe kind of 3 months of, started out with alignment and vision and where's this thing going and what do you see? How would you build it? I kind of had my own thoughts and wanted to see what he came up with and challenge them and work together on that. But then a big part is finding conflict and figuring out, where do we disagree? How do we handle that? When this inevitably happens as we build the company, what are the kind of steps that we'll put in place to figure that out? If we come to a point of like an impasse of, I think it should be done this way, I think it should be done that way, how do we solve that? And just figured those things out and found a little bit of conflict and got through it, which was a good thing to do,
Yeah, that's great. And at what stage did you go to YC to look for a co-founder? How far along in the journey were you?
Yeah, I mean, it was early. I was very fortunate that before this, being in academia and lecturing, you have summers that are not as busy as everything else. So the pain point kind of happened. I then was down out of classrooms and kind of was thinking about this. I probably spent way longer than most people do doing the customer discovery part. That's probably like the research PhD background there, where I overdid it, but it was good to get a really in-depth understanding of it. So probably 3-4 months kind of giving it my all before finding him, but had a couple of conversations with other people before that on that platform, and they were high caliber individuals. It just wasn't the same click or the same fit, you know?
Yeah. I'm curious, what kind of research did you do to validate your idea?
Yeah, this was one of the hardest parts, actually, to be honest, because when we first conceptualized the business model, it stemmed from asking companies, what are your challenges around the future of work and distributed work and remote work? And there's this whole wave that was going on around the Great Resignation, and the whole working world was changing. So they were crazy busy, like doing the sort of figuring out themselves, crisis management, all of that stuff. And then we're kind of knocking on the door of like a CPO, like one of the people that we got conversations with was like former chief people officer and director of talent at Netflix and Google, and he was working for Workday at the moment. So Perk, shout out to Tig, he's been very good to us. But that was hard to get access to people who had the answers to us, and it's a lot of annoying and sending messages out. But we ended up speaking pretty much to every large kind of tech, the Googles, Metas, Stripes, and we kind of went even mid-market and smaller, anyone who was distributed and fully remote, those kind of companies, talking to those. So spend an awful lot of time just really diving deep on the problems. What is your issue here? We kind of initially, you hear this thing that you shouldn't be doing where you have a solution in chase of a problem. So we kind of had to like park it mentally and be like, we don't know whether home swap is the thing. It might be. What's the problem? And the problem was repeated in every single conversation. So they all had 50 problems in this space. Like future work is very difficult to figure out. But the ones that repeated were attracting and retaining talent is really, really difficult. Even now that the market is kind of like a global talent market, that's great because you've access to talent, but now you have to differentiate your brand against every other company in the world. So there's a big challenge there to stand out. The next one then was in-person time. So that had even nuances in that problem. So some of them said, hey, we've got all these offices, we've got long-term leases, we want to make use of them. People don't want to come back to them. How do we do it? And another variation of the in-person time was, hey, we're fully remote, we're totally distributed. People get a little bit lonely. Collaboration isn't as nice as we'd like. We'd like to get people together a little bit more regularly, but that costs an awful lot of money. So there was nuances to the problems, but those two problems existed in every conversation. And the third most common problem was like onboarding. New hires in a more distributed world is a bit more difficult. So for us, we saw, right, if we could just imagine people can move around because there's no cost of doing so anymore because of accommodation. Hypothetically, if that was possible, does that solve a lot of these challenges? And it does, right? So the talent market is actively seeking more flexibility, more choice, more autonomy. You see all these tech companies that have these 30-day and 60-day work from anywhere policies now kind of reacting to that need in that market. You have companies that pay for big, expensive offsites. Even some companies like Salesforce for a while had built a big ranch in the States somewhere. So they were looking to try to figure out the problem. And we kind of said, I think when we build towards this will go a long way to do that, because it's kind of a win-win for the employer and the employee. The employee gets to move around and travel and see new cities, meet people when they're on the go, and the employer gets to get their people together more regularly without the big price tag. So yeah, it was the confidence of all that research that probably said that we were on the right track some way. But it was tough. That's one of the harder parts. Getting those conversations is tough.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, my next question was, what was the hardest part? And would you say that was the hardest part in starting Roamr?
Maybe. Like you send an awful lot of messages. You're asking people for their time without really being able to provide too much value up front. The hope is always trying to figure out how could we provide value to this person. And we started, our socials trying to be like a value add for HR people and chief people officers, sharing the latest research, staying well read, so that it's at least some element of a give back. For some people, who have really well established careers, they're at a point in their career where they kind of want to turn around and mentor and help. And if you're someone who can take on that advice, and maybe there's a relationship there that you can figure out. But yeah, it was tough. At times you're sending messages, no one's getting back to you. For Tig, when we ended up chatting to Tig, I ended up sending him a message on LinkedIn being like, hey, I'm blatantly playing the Irish card here. It's very hard to talk to people like you. Is there any chance to give us 30 minutes to just ask you a question, And we got quite lucky there, and he's been a great help. But other people like him, now another guy called Jeff Diana, who is going to come on board as an investor advisor. He was a former chief people officer at Atlassian, and he was on a career break. So I just said, hey, anytime in that sabbatical for a 30-minute coffee with the founder, and you just have to kind of keep going, be a little bit cheeky, try and stand out, try and show why it's relevant. That's one of the big things that I got better at as we went on. Instead of just being like, hey, can I have your time? Be like, the reason why you would be so helpful for us is your background in tech, your background in travel, your background in such and such. It would be unbelievable if I could just pick your brain for 30 minutes. And that kind of is what worked in the end, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I'm curious, I mean, you'd heard so many pain points that these businesses are dealing with in terms of remote work and the future of work. Were you ever tempted to try and solve any other problems that came up in these conversations?
There's a lot of them, yeah. One of them I think that there's a really good opportunity in the market for is in the sort of offsite space. We're not fully going to go after it ourselves. We've got a pretty narrow focus. We have built like an engagement piece to the platform as well, where let's say you get a remote working trip out to Lisbon and you're going to be there for a month. Wouldn't it be great if you could meet up with colleagues who also like running and coffee and kayaking, whatever your thing is? Because if you do a couple of co-working days, you feel more connected and the sense of belonging to the company. So it's better for the employee and employer perspective. So we have that built out on the Roamr platform. But what we saw is one of the customers they were doing an offsite in Tarragona in Barcelona, just outside it. We didn't have a supply of homes there. It's a very niche spot to do it, but they used the event opportunity on the map where they dropped in like event pins, being like, we're going to dinner here, we're going there. With Roamr up front, we take some information about you, about your bucket list, your hobbies and your interests. And then we use that to kind of find matches on properties that are in the places you like to go to with the hobbies you like to do. But when companies then click, hey, I'll attend this event, the organizers can see all of the hobbies that they have so they can make it more tailored, right? So if 7 people going are interested in cycling, rent a couple of bikes and tell them go down along by the beach and everyone will connect based on that. So there's a big opportunity in the offsite space. One of the challenges there that we've heard from companies is we got people all over the world. Where the hell do we do the offsite that's cost effective, that doesn't have someone traveling 8 hours and this person only traveling 20 minutes, and trying to find a way that the flights all align, the location aligns. So there's definitely product that's going to crop up in there. That's a big pain point, but we're chasing the one that we think has our background and the bigger opportunity is probably where we're going after. The corporate travel market is like a $1.5 billion or $1.5 trillion market. And about 70% of that spend of all travel is in corporate travel. So we're going after a big piece of the pie, I think.
Yeah, sounds like it. But yeah, there's in the B2B space, there's quite a few opportunities. And like you've been speaking about, like with the teething problems in remote work and stuff, huge corporate companies are struggling to make it all work. And you touched on like long-term leases, and you're hearing like what's going on in San Francisco, and these buildings are desolate and there's nothing they can do about it. So yeah, it is quite a few interesting problems cropping up. And how do you guys plan to ensure growth going forward?
Yeah, keep the foot on the gas is probably the starting point. But for us, if we make these sales in the pipeline that we have, we actually hit liquidity in the marketplace pretty quickly, right? So when we go B2B, by selling to one company that has 5,000 employees at the conversion rates we have, you get to scale pretty fast. So we don't need too many logos to make it work. But this is kind of getting nerdy marketplacey stuff that I was doing beforehand. But one of the key metrics for marketplaces is time to value, right? So how long, when they come through the gates, do they extract value? With Airbnb, if you upload your home, it could be a couple of months, right? You don't know who's going to stay. You might get a request. You don't necessarily like them. So you may not see value there at all. Whereas for us, imagine you're based in San Francisco and you get an email. Hey, Byron, Steven's coming to town. He's going to be here for 2 weeks. Do you want to get $1,500 to host him? And he'll also get $1,500. And you go, hell yeah, right? That's a nice, easy. It's ready to go. I know Steven, we're in the same company. There's a trust there already. So before you've even uploaded your home, you're extracting value. Like we're coming with a carrot of 1,000 or 1,500 quid. Depends on how long the trip is, right? That's much more compelling. So we're dragging you onto the platform by putting money in your pocket and by enabling you to put money in a colleague's pocket. So versus an Airbnb, I think that we'll activate much quicker there in that scenario. Also, a lot of companies that we're chatting to that have hubs typically have distributed workforces that they spend about 90% of their budget trying to bring those distributed companies to the hubs. right? So like 49% of one particular company we're chatting to are distributed, and about 90% of their spend is bringing people to the hubs. They already have the supply in those locations. So it actually can survive quite easily within that. Like if they have 100 people there and they're bringing one person there, it's a pretty good chance that you're going to get someone who wants that money. So that's one way that we'll do it. I don't want to give away too many of the secrets of how we're going about things as well, but we see the market a little bit differently in where it's going in travel too. So a lot of travel is now very reactive, right? So you've got to sit back in London and you say, God, I'd love to go to Paris for a month. And then you go on to a booking platform, you try and find somewhere that's affordable, you cross-reference that with flights, and you try and find the best match, and you try different cities, and it's a bit of a complex thing to go. But because you're excited about traveling, you do the pain. For us, we're taking information up front that gives us your preferences. So you could just be sitting back in London and you might get a ping that says, hey, you said you wanted to go to Paris and you said you like running. There's this 10K event going on here. Here's a home that'll cost you nothing. And here's a flight that's €100. You want to go. So that's like a proactive approach to travel, essentially. And I think that's where the market will go. I think hopefully we'll be part of guiding that as well. But that's a couple of the ways that we're thinking of activating in the marketplace. And we've learned a whole lot by onboarding and rolling out. There's different psychological things that Airbnb led the way on that we can apply as well. But essentially it just means how quickly can you drive value for the people in the community, and they'll stick around, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And that's really exciting. Just hearing a few things that you're working on. And I think you're right. If you're putting money back in people's pockets, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you use that? If you are happy with, staying in someone's house, or you're familiar with that colleague, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And in terms of funding, how did you finance getting Roamr off the ground?
Yeah, that's a challenge in and of itself normally. But I had a little bit of money, not much, in the bank account. I think €7,000, which to some people is loads of money. To people starting a business is not loads of money, really, most of the time, especially a tech business where there's like a platform that you need to build. So I started and took the plunge with a small amount of funds put aside, kind of backed myself into a corner to say, give it your all. I would probably be more risk tolerant maybe than the average person in that sense. So I was chatting with another buddy of mine who, was talking about potentially, let's do this Roamr thing together. And for him, he looked at like €5,000 as, I might light that on fire and it would be gone and I'd never get it back. Whereas I looked at it as an investment. I was like, worst case scenario, I learn a hell of a lot. It's cheaper than doing a master's. You learn way more than if you were doing a master's. So I looked at it as a learning opportunity, even if it didn't go to plan. So kind of bootstrapped it that way. Then met Jason, and Jason and myself came to an agreement as well. So there's a bit more money there. But the big thing that we got quite lucky with is we got support from Microsoft pretty early. So I was in a line for noodles, started talking to the dude beside me, and he worked for Microsoft on a founders program that they have where it's not a cash investment, but it's, you get technology costs covered up to about $300,000. So it meant that our runway is pretty long because it just happens to be quite bespoke and suits all of the tech costs we have. So we've spent very little money to get it to where we have. Finding someone like Jason is massively important in doing that. Otherwise, you got to have maybe 30K or 40K to outsource it and build it. So yeah, there's a few things that played in our favor there, but getting the product built quickly and in the hands of paying customers as well helps. So, that lines up for us in terms of advisors and investors and those kind of conversations. So we didn't go out actively fundraising. We typically found really smart people who we brought around us and they gave us great advice. And then after a while, those conversations kind of naturally turned to, are you guys doing a round? Are you opening up? And, and then we say, would you be interested? So those things, I think because we gave people a line of sight as to what we can do, it's probably played into our hands in terms of being able to figure out the fundraising piece as well as we go forward. So yeah, we're kind of gearing up for a pre-seed round, but I think we'll do enough in kind of the network that we have to be able to close that up hopefully quickly enough. That's wishful thinking as well, maybe, and a bit diluted, but it seems that the people we've spoken to are pretty on board.
That's great news. And you touched on risk there and how your friend saw it as like a hugely risky, and you just framed it differently. Have you always been that way? Or was it just like now's the time and you were just so confident in doing it?
That's a really interesting question. I probably always had more risk tolerance. than people around me. Definitely even in, family dynamics. So like my dad is one of the smartest people I know. He's worked in the same company for, the majority, if not all of his career kind of a thing. And yeah, just I almost went the reliable, safe, make sure we have all we need, the kids get through college and everything else. So because of that platform that my parents gave us, I think me and even our generation is in a bit more of a sort of lucky scenario in that we have the fallback that's not as far a fallback as previous generations before us. So that probably was one piece that played in their hand. But definitely even when I was going through school, there was always a little bit of seeing an opportunity in things and trying to figure things out, and had a couple of hustles that went on there when I was growing up. So I definitely had it innately to want to do it. But this one, again, it kind of lined up on those 2 or 3 things. So I don't really know where it comes from. I'm a terrible gambler, so I don't gamble. So I don't know where the risk for that is. Maybe it comes from, the evidence to support a bit of expertise in the space. I wouldn't go starting a random business that I had no knowledge in. I think sitting in the weeds and really diving deep on understanding the market and marketplaces and digital platforms probably gave me the confidence to say this is something you can kind of go ahead and do.
Yeah. I just find it so fascinating that how people, like at similar stages in their lives or even similar upbringings, can view a particular risk as more risky or less risky.
Even to add to that piece, I remember watching Stephen Bartlett on like a morning show where they asked him a question about that, like how did you decide to do this? And I thought his framing was superb then as well, where he said, if you're someone who's in a job that you don't like and you decide that you're going to stay in that job for the foreseeable future, that is far more brave to stay in a place where you have guaranteed unhappiness than it is to just choose any other alternative. Like uncertainty is way better than certain unhappiness. And I was like, that's a very interesting framing of it. But maybe that probably sat deeply somewhere as well.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I haven't thought of it that way before. But yeah, that makes sense. And you've mentioned that Jason has been extremely valuable to the whole process. But from a experience side of things, having a co-founder, someone to go through all of this with you, how has that experience been and how valuable is that?
Hard to put into words, to be honest. Yeah. Like the functional piece is very obvious in that, right? I now we separate duties. Like he builds the tech, phenomenally good at that, and I get to commercialize it. We come together on, I'm talking to customers, here's what customers are saying, here's what we should do with the product. I love being in the weeds on the front end and the design stuff anyway. That's kind of that's a bit of a creative endeavor, but being able to separate those duties and having full confidence that someone can handle that is super. But it goes well beyond that in that, there's like, it's a roller coaster, ups and downs, and like you have to be careful not to like tie your emotion and your mood to the success or lack thereof in the business. So if you had like, I don't know, a customer that looked really excited and they were going to get over the line, and then it's like, holy crap, this is the coming out party, we're going to make it. And if that stalls, or hey, we're going through layoffs now, so we can't put budget, and those kind of pieces, that could be very like painful. Jason is like such a regulator of emotions in those scenarios. Like he can he's like, all right, well, what do we do next? Or, that's grand, we'll see where that plays out, what's the next step kind of thing. So having that other person that's able to do that for you and pick you up if you're getting a little bit down in the dumps about one particular thing, or even just coming together and talking through the strategy at high level, verbalizing it. I think we do a really good job in challenging one another in the right way, where often we'll play devil's advocate even if we believe the other person's stance, right? So, why should we go after this type of market? If I believe fully that we should, I want Jason to talk through his thoughts, and he does the same to me. And like, we just figure out that that's the way to validate that we're doing it the right way. We're not just making willy-nilly gut decisions. Gut is somewhat informed and it's great, but you need to have a clear thought process and almost data to support. So yeah, those kind of challenges probably keep us online as well, and keep us focused too.
Yeah, that sounds extremely valuable. And I'd like to just go back to when you were lecturing about entrepreneurship. Had you had any previous entrepreneurial experience while you were lecturing?
Not in any way that I commercialized or made good money out of. Had small little sort of side hustly things going on, but never anything that I could stand up and say, hey, I started a business and I created value for customers. So no, I haven't.
And this might be a hit or miss question, but did any students question that at all?
It's a very fair question, actually, when you think about it. But I don't remember any particular instance where they did. Like one piece is like you fully understand and you get down in the theory and you can troubleshoot. So the entrepreneurship module was kind of all these excited students coming up with business ideas that they had to then take through all the steps for the course of like the full year. And you kind of guide them through all that validation, and like there is a framework and theory that you can apply. So I think maybe when you're showing them that and when you're giving them hopefully good insight as to, hey, you could maybe think about this, or maybe you should sell that to this kind of customers. Maybe that type of feedback buys you that grace, having not done it. But there was definitely probably an internal piece where I was like, you seem to be talking and telling people how to do it. Maybe there was confidence there as well that even different business plans that I was giving feedback on, felt like it was insightful. But there was an element of you've never done it yourself. Don't be talking the talk until you walk the walk as well.
Yeah, I get that. Or like a form of imposter syndrome. And do you think that imposter syndrome was part of what pushed you to start Roamr?
I have a very sort of strange relationship with kind of imposter syndrome as a term. Like I hear about the challenge that people tend to have with it, and quite fortunately, it wasn't really something that troubled me too much. I think it was probably the framing thing again. Like for me, I would way rather be doing something where I'm like just kind of floating, trying to stay above water and learning. Like I would way rather be in an environment where I'm not the best person at that thing, or hang around with people who are far better than me, that I almost don't belong in that circle, but immediately that elevates you, So even when I do things like going for runs and training, like the people that I try to train with are like ultra marathon runners and almost Olympians, and just learn as much as you can by being around people who are so much better than you. So I've never really been too afraid to kind of step out of the comfort zone and try something for fear of failure. So I'm quite lucky. I think that maybe was, I don't know where it came from, but it definitely puts you in those environments where you get a lot better, and it removes a little bit of the fear. So quite fortunately, maybe there's a nuance of imposter syndrome in that sort of entrepreneurship space, but if I didn't have the idea for Roamr, I would see myself as probably somewhat being in that world. So I think the reason why I went ahead with it was those kind of 3 criteria that aligned, as opposed to, oh, I feel like an imposter, so I have to go and do it. It was more driven by, this is an opportunity that I feel like I can go and execute on. And I don't want to say all that like, oh, I've never had imposter syndrome flippantly and like make people feel bad for feeling that way. One thing that really helped me at a time in my life that I needed was a like TED Talk YouTube video. There was a guy who did this thing called comfort zone challenges, and it sounds cringy to even say it, but he used to lay on the ground for 30 seconds in really busy public places. And the whole reason was he didn't want to do it. And, he had been a basketballer. I could maybe link it. It's probably quicker than me explaining the whole video. But ultimately, the premise is put yourself in situations where your heart rate is high and you're uncomfortable and you don't want to do it. Stay in that sort of space and that feeling for 30 seconds or a minute. And your body just gets accustomed to, oh, that wasn't actually as bad. And the next time you get kind of thrown up with something like that, you are less likely to kind of shy away from it if you just kind of intentionally push that comfort zone with these little challenges along the way. So you can construct them, or you could just acknowledge that something scares you a little bit in work, and you say, you know what, I'm going to use this as a way to challenge myself and push the comfort zone. So I think I watched that video at the right time in my life as well, when I was kind of going into second year of college and trying to get out there and make friends and meet new people and have new experiences. So a little bit of luck along the way, that I probably saw the right things at the right time.
Well, it's one thing seeing the right things at the right time and actually taking action on them, which I think many people don't actually do, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with Noah Kagan, who runs AppSumo, but he has a similar challenge where he tells people to go to a coffee shop, order a coffee, and then ask for a 10% discount or a free coffee, and just say that and wait for the barista to respond. And if they're confused and don't respond, just like be in that uncomfortable moment and then be like, okay, cool, no discount, and take your coffee, pay for it, and leave. And yeah, so he really pushes that coffee challenge. And so, yeah, it's very, very similar to what you were speaking about. But actually doing it, like I've heard him say it many, many times, there's a difference there.
Yeah, you get like that. Your bodily response is just like it's a biological response when you think about doing that, laying on the ground or asking the random stranger, what the time is. And there's different variations. I saw another video of a guy. It was probably not the same guy. It's not Noah. I don't think his name was, but it was rejection therapy. So he set out for 100 days in a row to get rejected, doing something different to try to overcome that fear. And he'd go and ask for like a burger refill in a fast food place, or knock on someone's door and say, can I plant this flower in your back garden? Which is wacky and crazy, but by the end of it, he just had no issues of ever doing it. And he even learned a whole lot about sales there, where that garden example of the flower sticks out with me. So he knocked on someone's door, said, can I plant this in your back garden? And she was like, no. And then he said, can I just ask why? And then it turned out that she had a dog that would chew it up instantly. And she said, you should go across the road to the Farrells across the road. They have like a garden and they'd probably love this. So like his mindset was, if you just ask why, maybe it leads to a conversion of a sale. And there's loads of learnings in that. And even the coffee shop example, like I had a really cool experience this time last year, maybe a little month before, where just sitting in a random coffee shop, sat up beside a guy, and conversation struck up, and being okay and willing to kind of chat with strangers and put yourself out there, that led to like a really great friendship. He and his best mate were there. They're ultra marathon runners. They ended up convincing me to go and run an ultra marathon like 3 months later, even though I'm not a runner in any way, shape, or form. Just felt like these were the right kind of people to be around, and followed up on that. And yeah, so Jim and Zach, two dudes that I met in the coffee shop, had a profound impact on my life. Unfortunately, Jim's no longer with us, but his legacy is absolutely lived on and kind of pushes me to go and try and do those things. So yeah, kind of, and the Microsoft thing for us came out of a conversation in a line for noodles, and it turned out to be one of the most impactful things. So yeah, stepping into the uncomfort is probably one of the best pieces of advice that I could probably leave.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And do you think like lecturing on this topic provided you unique insights that made starting Roamr easier?
Yeah, it definitely did. Like, you learn so much around other use cases, other failures, like what type of pricing models there are that are out there. So for sure, like being in that world and being just a constant vacuum for information definitely puts you in a better space. It doesn't go the whole way. Like, theory is only so much. You have to actually get in and put yourself under pressure and in practice and figure those things out. But like, even if you look at resources like Y Combinator's Startup School, there's a whole load of smart people that have done this before you. You're not the first person to start a company. You'd be a fool not to go and learn from them. It would be the equivalent of being a basketball player and never watching Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Like, that would be a foolish way not to train and get better. But you still need to go out on the court. You still need to put the reps in. Maybe it helps your technique, but you still need to get the practice. So combining both of them is good. And just by where I was at before it, I probably had more of the learnings done. I'm still doing it and constantly trying to find ways to keep improving, but it definitely gives you a little bit of a leg up. Yeah.
Yeah. And being as far along on your journey as you are now, what advice would you give to someone wanting to start their own business?
It's hard to be as flippant about it, but just start it and give it a shot. Like, you're guaranteed to be in the same place right now if you don't try it. You might try it and you might fail, but you will learn stuff. You'll meet people along the way that will open the next opportunity. Like, don't look at it as failure. Look at it as learning is probably the best thing. You don't necessarily have to quit the job straight off the bat. I would probably spend some time doing the groundwork, make sure there is a problem there, make sure it's a sizable enough problem, make sure that you're someone who's got a bit of insight. You don't have to know everything maybe in that industry, but try and pick something that's in your domain, or else go and learn more about it and then go and start it. But you just can't really beat getting started, even if it's on the side and doing that for a couple of months. Figure out the research of the customers and then go and maybe try and figure out a commercialization strategy. But the best next step that you could take would be try and find somebody who would buy the product that you're conceptualizing, and just talk to them and say, what's the pain? Would this solve it? How much would you be willing to pay? How big of a pain point is it? And where does this sit in your priorities? Like, maybe it's different if you're going B2C and B2B, you ask different questions. But if you were just to do one next step, just start talking about the idea out loud to people. I think founders have this like innate protectionism to try and not let anybody know your idea. The majority of people don't ever bother starting. So don't be afraid to share the idea. If we're sitting in our early conversations with advisors, kind of hiding what we're doing and not telling them what we're doing, there's a few things that impacts. One is they may not invest in your business because they see you as someone who doesn't have the confidence to be like, I don't care who else comes into this market, we're going to be the ones that succeed in this market. But the next thing is, if you don't tell them fully about the business and the idea, they can't connect you to people in their network if they don't fully understand it. That's been one of the best wins for us. Like, people being like, oh, you should talk to the CEO of this company. I know them from college. And because you've been open and said, this is what we're doing, this is the challenges, this is what we're struggling with, that happens. So talk to people about the idea and go talk to customers about the idea is probably the best thing you could do.
Yeah, that's great advice. And this is a tricky one, but what has been the biggest lesson that you've learned so far?
I don't know if I have something that's like a real nice kind of, I don't know, tweet or takeaway, but the place that we learned the most for us was in onboarding. When we were building the product and trying to sell it, we didn't think about onboarding and an onboarding process. You have to have customers to do onboarding. So it was like this distant thing that we were like, we'll figure it out when we get there. And then we landed customers, and we landed multiple customers at the same time. So we said, right, let's just, you hear the theory is like launch fast, launch early, and learn. We learned an awful lot through that process. Like, our activation of users was poor compared to where it is now. I think we've increased it by like 24% over a couple of months by figuring out different things. So one of them is, don't expect your users to do the things you want to do voluntarily. Sometimes you got to force them to do some of those steps. So, we reshuffled the onboarding. You don't get straight into Roamr and see all the homes now. You got to do a little bit of stuff to get in, and it's kind of you keep the candy for when they get through those hurdles a little bit, rather than giving them access directly. And now Airbnb take a different approach there as well. They want someone to fall in love with the home, then they go and do the steps. For us, we kind of need people to be activated in the platform, so we have to kind of give a little bit of a hold back on that. So onboarding was probably where we learned the most. I don't have like a specific lesson for it other than actively engage with the people who are using it. There's loads of tools and platform tools out there that you can kind of almost like see the way that people use your product. That's really, really important, because there's pain points there that you didn't realize, or your product so familiarly that you can navigate to where you need to go so quickly, but users don't know your product the way that you know your product, so you get caught in your own bias there if you're not careful. So understanding how people are doing it, and then creating the environment where they are comfortable or even actively want to give you feedback. That was a huge one for us. So we've got a really super champion in one of the companies. Shout out to Sam at Localize. He like sends us Loom videos being like, hey, I would love if the product did this, or what have you guys thought about doing this? Jason, being Jason, was able to take one of those first feedbacks, build it, and like ship it immediately overnight, so that we messaged Sam back being like, check it out now. He's like, wow, okay, yeah, all right. So from his perspective, he now knows that anytime he gives us feedback, we care about it, we listen to it, we build it, and that creates, I think, that sort of learning environment. So probably a bunch of lessons wrapped in there, but it's typically around onboarding for us that we learn the most, and customer interactions, I think.
Yeah, that's so great to have customers so committed to improving the platform and wanting to give feedback. It's so useful, I can imagine. And what would you say are the biggest misconceptions of foundership today?
I don't know. You see, we're maybe part of the problem as well, like with the LinkedIn piece, as like it's a marketing tool for a lot of people. So you're putting out the highlight reel as well. It's not always going to be perfect. Our product is a little bit, I suppose, eye-catching in that like you get to do free travel. So the content that we put out there is kind of quite exciting, and it looks like you've got this great life. And like, we have been able to travel, like we've been abroad, we pick up the laptop, we go, we spend time in different countries. It's not like a holiday in any way, shape or form. We're working all those times. So maybe there's an element to that. So don't always see what's going on socials. There's a whole lot of hard work that has to happen in the background there. Yeah, you need to learn how to be resilient. You need to learn how to live quite frugally at the start to get it off the ground. Like, there's a whole lot of sacrifice that happens where, I miss a friend's birthday last week because we have a customer that we're trying to get on board. We maybe don't see family as much as we would like to. And you kind of hope that they know that you're really passionate about trying to do something and figure it out. And you almost are hoping that they'll forgive you in time. So it's not easy. You got to have a good support network around you as well. So like, quite lucky that Jess and Anya are phenomenal supporters for myself and Jason, and couldn't be doing it without that kind of support in so many different, like, emotional and financial and everything that is wrapped up in that. So It's not easy, even if there's sort of like, you see sort of Instagram content of like, I'm a freelancer, I'm a digital nomad. All you got to do is do this and get 3 clients, and then you have a steady income that lets you live in Bali. It's not that at all. It's dark nights, wet nights in West Cork in Ireland when there's wind and rain howling, and you've been at the desk from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. and you're getting dropped a cup of tea and kind of saying keep going. So that's the truth. Even though our product enables us to have really nice weeks here and there sporadically, that's not the norm, even though that might be the things you see.
Yeah, I think that's important because social media obviously shows the best sides of everything and what people want you to see. But it is important to understand that it's a grind. And what are your hopes and aspirations for Roamr? Where do you see it in the next few years?
Well, we have global ambitions by default. Like, the business model that we're building is instantly global, nearly knocking the glass. So the business model that we're building is instantly global. So we definitely have that sort of unicorn ambition. We want to build something absolutely massively impactful. The business model means that we're playing in a pretty big market with some pretty big incumbents, but I think we've got our incentives right to be able to chase down an awful lot of that market. So yeah, we definitely have our eyes set on the big prize for sure. I think we're fortunate as well in that, from the way that you think about these things, it has to make sense financially, and there has to be a capital gain too. And if you're bringing on board money, you have to be able to show the line of sight to those investors as to what an exit might look like. We're quite lucky that the market that we're playing in has multiple different players that we may end up being able to figure out partnerships with, and that may turn into an exit at some point in the future. But it's definitely for now building something that's really compelling, that exists, that solves an awful lot of pain points, and has a lot of impact on people's lives. Like, being able to enable the coolest memories that they have. Everybody remembers the time they visited a particular country and maybe drove a red Vespa around the Colosseum. Like, that's super stand out in my memory. I don't know what I had for lunch last Tuesday. So if you're involved in creating those memories and giving the financial alleviation to people who can go and have those life experiences because of you, hopefully that impact is something that we get to leave beyond us.
Yeah. Oh, that's very exciting. And I'm excited to follow along. I think big things are coming for Roamr. But before we end, Stephen, I usually hand over the mic to my guests and ask them if they have a question for me.
Okay. I thought when you said hand over the mic, I was going to be singing there karaoke. So thankfully you haven't put that one on me. I don't know. A big thing for me is trying to constantly build a network and speak to smart people. So who's the smartest person that you've come across in your days? And yeah, I wonder if I can connect with them and have a coffee.
There's actually one person that comes to mind that I think may be an interesting conversation. He's a founder. His name is Sam Simmons, and he's creating a product called Mint Pass, which is also travel focused, but it's focused on sharing your experiences, because travel inspiration and booking is quite a convoluted process at the moment. You're looking for inspiration on Instagram or TikTok, and you're reading some TripAdvisor reviews. And the holy grail is usually a Google Notes or Apple Notes from a friend with all their recommendations and the things that they loved. And so he's trying to create that experience in an app where people share their experiences with similar interests to you. And so, yeah, that's what he's working on. And so there could be some synergies there on the experience side of things, but I think you guys would have a very interesting conversation.
Man, that is wild timing for you to say that, right? So earlier on in the week, so we're going to Budapest for a couple of days, myself and my girlfriend, and I messaged a friend who works out there. He's another podcast host, but I said, hey, we're in Budapest, what should we be doing to avoid the tourist traps? He sent back this like amazing email with the inside scoop, which baths to go to, what restaurants to avoid. And immediately I was like, this should be a product where you just go on, I even envisaged it as a load of cards, and you just click the Budapest card and that flips over and then drops down that insider scoop. It makes sense for us to have that in Roamr as well. So there's definitely a cool conversation, but that was quite a selfish question. So I'll give you another one to maybe be fairer to the listeners. But I'm a massive believer in the product of your environment kind of theory, or of the 5 closest people you keep around you. But yeah, how have you thought about cultivating that? Have you seen transitions in your own kind of friends group? How do you balance that with people maybe you know for years, and then gravitating towards people who are, you know, you're a new person now, they maybe have a greater impact on your life because of where you're trying to get to? Yeah. Any thoughts in that space?
Yeah, I'm constantly thinking of that because obviously that the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with is a message that is pushed out quite a lot. So it's not difficult to be reminded of it. But I lived in Hong Kong for 4.5 years before I moved to London about a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago. And I actually struggled to maintain relationships when I was in Hong Kong with the people back home. And I didn't really connect with the circle there as much as I felt like I was going in a slightly different direction. So coming back to London has been interesting because there's existing friends and new ones. And I'm consciously thinking about how to form that circle because I know how much of an impact they have on you. And so, to be honest, I'm at the stage now where I'm trying to go to meetups. Like, are you familiar with My First Million meetup and My First Million podcast?
No.
I'd highly recommend it. It's my favorite podcast. It's great. It's the 2 founders. The founder of Milk Road newsletter, and named Sean Puri, and Sam Parr is the other founder. And they just discuss, they have really good banter and they discuss things, but there's meetups for people who love the podcast all around the world. And I'm trying to go to more sort of founder, entrepreneur meetups and surround myself with those people because from the few that I've been to, it's like an instant connection. We're straight to talking about our interests and like what we're working on. And I really love that. And I don't drink. I haven't drunk for 4.5 years now. And so
amazing.
That's also an interesting dynamic because I don't like, people tend to bond over a drink, and it makes you realize after quitting that that's the only thing you had in common. And so I'd say I'm in a transitional phase and I'm not socializing as much as I used to. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I'm at. I'm thinking about it.
There's a lot of similarities. Last year, I stopped drinking for, like, I set 6 months as the target at the start of the year last year. And for a few reasons, you know, wanted to give full attention 7 days a week, no hangovers, full focus on the business. It gives you the opportunity to kind of default to no. When someone's like, hey, we're going out for da-da-da, you can kind of be like, oh, I'm not drinking these days. And you kind of get left alone a little bit to stay and keep the head down. You definitely need to balance and figure out other ways. So like a hike in the morning is a perfect way of doing that with friends. You save more money. So that was another thing, extend that runway. And I was getting into fitness at the time, but I was training for a marathon. I'm not a runner. Went to try to do my first marathon in April of last year, and then met the 2 guys in the coffee shop and ended up running an ultra marathon in May. There's no way I would have done that if I was drinking, and even just not like excessively, just having a normal lifestyle, because your Sunday run doesn't happen because you're hungover and you're eating crappy food. So that's been a massive impact. Like, I went to the Rugby World Cup and made up for it, I'm sure, in the second half. But I've decided again on the turn of the new year to do another 6 months. So I'm running till the birthday this year and see what happens. And I could see myself also not, going back to it after that. But it's been massive. The only other thing I'd add, I don't know, as an advice or just what's worked for me, is find people who are 2 years ahead of where you are and like where you want to be in 2 years' time. That's been a massive one. So I've got friends in the sort of startup space that have done great things, built great companies, raised phenomenal money, and seeing how they did it and being close to that and having that relationship with them where you can ask questions and just be around them, that's been massively impactful as well. So yeah, being active and kind of conscious around thinking who are the 5 people that I need to kind of keep around me and figure that out too as well has been massive. It's probably a cliche to say that, but to maybe pick someone that's 2 years ahead of you and then like 5 or 10 years ahead of you, if you can. They don't have to be the closest 5, but if you can get that sort of connection where you have a ability to pick up the phone and figure something out, that's a really useful one, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. Definitely going to give that a go and be more intentional about it. So thanks for joining me today, Stephen. I really enjoyed our conversation. If people want to find out more about Roamr and you, where can they do so?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It was a really interesting one. But yeah, if you want to get in touch, we kind of do a lot of our stuff and live completely in LinkedIn. It's B2B business. So Roamr on LinkedIn, or Roamr. the website is roamr.org. So yeah, send a connection, reach out, give us a follow on the socials page, and a bit of interaction will go a long way for us.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Chat soon. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.